This is Dave Meltzer with Entrepreneurs the Playbook, and I have Aaron Emigh. He's the co-founder and CEO of Brilliant, and I think that's a good place to start because this guy is brilliant. And Aaron, welcome to the Playbook.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on.
Business is an evolution, and here you are in a crowded space, but with a very unique offering. So I wanted to start kind of connecting the dots backwards. And, when I'm looking at businesses, I'm always kind of determining, okay, how is it that some people are so successful in a space that's so crowded? I get people who are innovative and they come up with like a unique idea, but I always like the people that win, and I'll use Under Armour as an example in my career, because, they came to us when we were at Lee Steinberg and offered, a $10,000 investment. And in the back of my head, I'm like, who wants to compete against Nike? You know what I mean? It's like there's so many businesses out there. The smart home business is a crowded space, and there's some really big players in it. Like, Kevin Plank faced Nike and did really well. What is the strategy and perspective of when you enter a crowded space of distinguishing yourself and providing more value than big companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think you do have to differentiate yourself. You are going to lose if you just walk in with something that's a copy of what other people are already doing and the same playbook. Now, your innovation can be in the product, in the underlying technology, or it can be in the marketing and the channels and the approach to it. In Under Armour's case, it was probably more the latter. In Brilliant's case, it's more a unique product with a unique set of capabilities, as well as an understanding of who it is that's building homes, that enables us to sell it through different sales channels and so on than the large companies have penetrated.
And connecting the dots backwards from Brilliant, I always like someone like you to, number one, if you could define kind of what an entrepreneur is for you in the context of your journey, basically growing up as an immigrant with nothing and working your way all the way through the academia, the entrepreneurship. How do you define an entrepreneur, and how has that developed or through your journey from, the true grassroots all the way to Brilliant?
An entrepreneur is probably somebody unusual enough to be unemployable, but resourceful enough to be successful nonetheless.
Wait, say that one more time. I like the gold nuggets, so I make people repeat them because not everybody's going to listen to this again. I want them to catch that because I do so many of these. That's brilliant. No pun intended. Say that one more time.
Yeah, I mean, I just was trying kind of being a smart aleck, but I just said an entrepreneur is someone who's, odd enough to be unemployable, but resourceful enough to overcome that and become successful nonetheless. I think that, some people have a drive to do something on their own and attach more importance than most to the idea that they've created something, which is never a solo act. It's almost always a group of people that create it, but still to feel like you have a great deal of agency in that. Because you're up against a lot of friction. It's a lot easier to make something work when you have a machine behind it, an established brand and channels and so on that are ready to roll. And it takes a little bit of an aberrant mindset to want to eschew all of that and try to swim upstream with something that's your own idea.
But there's a common denominator, whether I have key executives like myself or yourself or entrepreneurs or even Hall of Fame athletes. There's this desire. I call it a common denominator of I must be what I can be, regardless of where I am. And, your journey really reeks of this backbone of you must be what you can be. Where does that drive come from?
I don't know where that drive comes from. I think that there's just a strain of individuality, a strain of being unwilling to sort of do what you're advised to do, and really wanting to try things your own way. I think that in terms of where the capabilities come from, that's a combination of things that you might be born with. On the other hand, formative experiences that you've had, whether it's early in childhood or later on.
Yeah, and speaking of your childhood too, what exactly did you learn from, I take a lot of lessons from my childhood, things like being more interested than interesting, never quitting, enjoying the consistent, persistent pursuit of my potential. What was your childhood like, and what lessons did you learn?
My childhood had a bunch of different eras. There was a lot of diversity in it, and my very first years were more traditional, and then we moved out to the woods in New Hampshire with no electricity and no running water, and more or less subsistence farming, and that was kind of an odd background, perhaps, for someone to grow up and be a smart home entrepreneur. But I developed from that, I would say two things. First of all, a sort of resourcefulness. If your family is living on $6,000 a year and you've got two cars that barely run and 14 more cars out in the woods, and you have to keep them running, and every time something breaks, you have to go and scavenge parts over a car that might not be the same as the one that you're fixing, but you got to make it work anyhow. And there's just a sense that, like, we built houses that we lived in, so you sort of understand that you can make things and you can fix things and you can figure it out, and it's up to you to figure it out because no one else is going to do it. And then the second lesson is maybe an odd one, because people draw different lessons from their childhoods. And I know that most entrepreneurs come from upper middle class backgrounds. But for me, perhaps a lesson of growing up without very much money for part of my childhood, again, there were different eras, is that the money wasn't that important. I always feel very confident in my ability to survive, and that's made it easy for me to take risks. And in a way, that's the same way that a lot of people who come from affluent backgrounds might feel about it. But for me, growing up without the money and feeling like that's not really a big problem, it had that same kind of freeing idea that maybe the money isn't something that I have to worry about when I'm making career choices. There were other areas about, after that I moved to India, and then, to other places. So there were different lessons from different times.
Have you ever asked your parents, or have you derived the value-based decisions that they made of, it's more abnormal, like you said, to grab your kids and go out with no electricity or water for sustainable farming, or to move your kids all to India. And I'm always really interested on, understanding your parents' perspective of what their values were to do that, to have the courage to do that. Because when I find people do that, their children really benefit from not being ordinary, but being what I call extraordinary.
I think it's a really interesting question. And, for us, living in poverty is different than a lot of people who are in that situation, because it was voluntary. My mother, my parents had divorced, and my mother felt very strongly about pacifism, and felt that it was immoral to pay taxes because they were supporting the military in a way that she couldn't support. Now, I don't share that belief, but the fact that she was willing to act on the courage of that conviction, even to the point of uprooting the whole family and choosing a very non-conventional lifestyle, is probably one that stuck with me. And my father, on the other hand, is somebody with an extraordinary intellectual curiosity and sense of adventure, and that's what led us to India. That was with my father later, where he was doing field research into theater forms in Eastern India, and that idea that you can kind of go anywhere and pursue any sort of idea that you have is probably something that I soaked up implicitly from him. So I don't think there was ever a sit-down moral lesson in these things, but you absorb by observation these kinds of lessons over time.
And it's amazing how everything evolves. We were talking about connecting the dots backwards. And one of the favorite things I do, because so many people want to sit in the situation that I'm in professionally, they'll say, I dream of being a sports agent. How can I do that? Should I go to law school? Shouldn't I? And they want a perfect formula of to be, what they want to be. And I keep telling them, look, you can't connect the dots forward. You can only connect them backwards. And if you connected my dots backwards, not only is it a shit show, but like literally it doesn't make any logical sense at all. For you, what were the greatest influences, whether they're books that you've read, teachers you've had, or experiences that led you to understand the space that you're in?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. None of us are really completely sui generis. at the same time, I don't think that there was one inspiration that I can point to, but I remember as a kid, I was just having a conversation with somebody about Horatio Alger, for example. And, he wrote these kind of formulaic and silly books that were designed to inspire children to work hard and follow their paths. But that kind of notion of, if you work hard, then anything is possible, and combined with, maybe the sort of Jules Verne notion of what the world's going to look like and so on. There was a kind of an optimism in that, fin de siècle era of literature that probably influenced me a good bit as a kid. And in particular, knowing that I was not where I wanted to be, gave me a lot of impetus to think, okay, what is it that I need to know in order to do the kinds of things that I want to in life? What are the tools that I need? What's the knowledge that I need? And I read voraciously. I tried to, I started to teach myself computer programming literally by kerosene lantern, writing with a nibbed pen on the scraps of paper and so on. And so I had, for whatever reason, from a very young age, this idea of the kind of thing that I wanted to be doing, that was very juxtaposed to the way that I was living at the time. Not that there was anything wrong with the way I was living, just that I knew that wasn't my path necessarily.
One of the things I'd love for you to do for us, to get inside of your perspective, is a comparative analysis of, how your sustainable living with no water and no electricity comparatively has some attributes of a smart home itself, the brilliance of a smart home. I was looking at it myself and trying to draw these, and I could find some, but I'd love to see your perspective on, where's the similarities, the comparative analysis of, here's a guy that's living with 14 cars in his backyard in order to facilitate a type of consciousness or brilliance that exists from no technology into the most advanced technology that tries to pertain to what I think the objectives of your parents were. How and what is your perspective on that comparative analysis?
Yeah, I think that perhaps I got to experience more evolution in technology than most people have in my life. That by starting from an anachronistic perspective that's maybe a century before my actual era, I got to experience a full century of technology evolution by the time I was in high school, and that probably informs some of the way that I think about things right now. For example, there's a lot of discussion about what the right form factor is for controlling a smart home. And I have a very strong point of view on that it is part of the home. And what Brilliant has done is it's built a smart home control panel that's built into the walls of the house, but in a very cost-effective, easy to deploy way where it replaces standard light switches. Now, why do I think that that's the right way to do it rather than having an app on your phone where it's a portable control approach or an appliance that sits on a countertop? I think that if you look at the evolutionary history of all of the important systems on a home, whether that's electricity or plumbing or heat, they've all sort of started as a portable technology, carrying a candle around the house to illuminate it, carrying buckets of water in from a well outside, to an appliance-based approach, which is a wood or coal stove that heats up a room or a part of the house that sits there and is an appliance that you use, or a gas lighting fixture, or a hand-operated pump that might be in the house somewhere. And then ultimately gets built into the walls of the home. And in the same way, I see the evolutionary path of smart home control, starting with the portable app, evolving to an appliance that sits on a counter or tabletop, and ultimately being built into the walls of the home, because smart technology is becoming as essential to a home as electricity or plumbing or heating is. And so perhaps experiencing those earlier stages of evolution helps me to see where it might be heading in the future.
I love that because it's the exact direction in, being in the early pre-chasm state of, the world's first smartphone that I was the CEO of. I used to tell people, you go from handheld, like the candle, to a wearable, to an insertable, and then eventually replaceables, right? We'll be replacing human nature the same way that you're describing home technology. Uh, I used to think that my perspective always came from just being old, but it was so unique that you're like, not only am I almost your age, Dave, but I was 100 years earlier in my technology because my mom set me back. But one thing that's nice about what your evolution is and comparatively how it has affected what I love in your strategy at Brilliant, and how competitive you are, it is the basis of what I believe success comes from. And, my mom taught me to always study. I'm a big reader as well, history. And I would have like, why am you always tell me to look forward? Why am I always reading about the past? And she said, because human nature never changes. And when we take away all that technology in an early age from you, you actually were, evolving under the auspice of human nature and how technology can enhance our nature. And your mom, in her nature, being a pacifist, right? She deprived herself of certain technologies in place of her beliefs, which is in essence brilliant, and aligned with what Brilliant is about. Last question, real quick. Coming from that long lineage of human nature perspective and technology evolution, where are we going to be with our homes 100 years from now?
Well, 100 years is a long time, and if you look back to Jules Verne or Tom Swift stories or something, they haven't been terribly accurate predictors of where we are in the future.
It's a fun question for the playbook.
It is, but I will say one thing that I'm very certain of, and I don't think it takes 100 years. I think it takes 10 years. That we're not even going to be talking about smart home in a matter of 10 years. If you think about cars. I mean, you think about almost anything, but think about cars. 20 years ago, there was all this excitement about how they're going to put computers into cars and they're going to have smart cars, and it's going to be this thing, and we're all going to be thinking about smart cars. And that came to pass. The average new car has 45 computers in it. It's controlling everything from the, all different aspects of the engine, all these different sensors everywhere, diagnostics, infotainment. That the whole car is filled with computers, and nobody is talking about smart cars. They're just better cars. They're more fuel efficient, they're more powerful, they're more reliable, they're just better. And in the same way, right now, we're really excited about smart tech in homes, a smart home, because, oh my God, we're putting computers into the house, and they're going to do this, and they're going to do that. And that's all very true, but it's a sign of immaturity that we're even talking about it that way. Because in the future, your house is just going to be better than it ever was. And you're not going to buy a house that isn't smart any more than you're going to buy a feature phone, or or a car that doesn't have any computers in it, because there's going to be no such thing. We're going to have better houses. It's going to be part of what people expect. So part of our mission today is to understand all of the value that can be created by smart technology and try to simplify it, try to unify it and simplify it and make it accessible to everybody, so anyone can use it, anywhere in the home. And that's really the challenge right now. And the fact that we've been talking about smart tech means that solution is still underway.
What I love about you, Aaron Emigh is not only the co-founder and CEO of Brilliant, but you're a CBO for society. That's the Chief Betterment Officer, because I agree with you. Through technology, we cannot make our situations better or create better situations for ourselves, and no place to do that better than our homes. And we're learning that right now, how important it is to have a better home in this time of pause. So I appreciate your perspective. I appreciate your playbook, and certainly appreciate you. Aaron Emigh, thank you so much for joining me on Entrepreneurs, the Playbook.